Right, just a couple more notes on the implications of divorce, and then we'll talk about the big three sociological theories and their perspectives on family, and that'll be it for this week. So, the steady number of divorces in our society has affected how we define marriage and family. So, like I said, divorce has kind of peaked actually in the 1980s in terms of the rate, and since then, the divorce rate has actually been declining very, very slowly. So the divorce rate isn't the highest it's ever been. That is a myth that, again, is often portrayed inaccurately in the media. But nonetheless, divorce has significantly increased since the 1950s and 60s. And a big reason behind that is because the stigma behind divorce has lessened. So it's not necessarily considered as deviant or as it's not as negatively sanctioned to get a divorce today as it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. So the amount of power that the institution of marriage once held continues to decrease as divorce rates and the commonality of divorce increases, and the sense of permanence that was once associated with marriage has weakened. So again, that norm that marriage was this permanent union, that you got married for better or for worse till death do you part, doesn't necessarily hold the same social pressure as it does today, and people are less likely to be stigmatized if they get a divorce in comparison to in the past. Right? So let's take a look at marriage and family from a functionalist perspective. According to functionalism, family serves as a mechanism for maintaining social order and provides us a number of different functions in society. One of the functions of family and marriage is that it contributes to reproduction and the socialization of children. Of course, any society needs new people in it to continue to fill the roles that it needs to in order for society to essentially sustain itself. A family is also functional because it provides us with systems of affection and companionship, right? One of the norms associated with families or the roles of families is to care for one another, right? So families are functional in that they provide specifically children and other dependent members of family support systems to care for one another. Family also provides some rules about sexual regulation, who it's okay to have sex with, who it isn't. Specifically in our society, like we've talked about before, we have taboos in place. It's taboo to have sex with someone that you are legally related to or someone you're related to by blood. And the purpose of that actually stems back from hundreds of years ago. They didn't want people having sex with people that you're related to because it results in some potential physical abnormalities in child that are born within in children that are born to people that are related through blood to one another. And since then, those regulations have kind of been extended, including this idea that marriages should be monogamous to ensure that people aren't having sex with anyone other than their spouse. But as we talked about in previous mini lecture, that norm of marital monogamy is actually starting to shift a little bit and becoming more socially acceptable for married people to have multiple sexual partners. Another function of family is economic cooperation, this expectation that family members will economically provide for one another. And each family and each marriage operates this or approaches this differently. Like we've talked about before in the past, it was the norm for the male to be the breadwinner in a family, to be the sole economic provider. But in current society, it's far more common for dual income households where both people in a marriage are actually working and contributing, and then they pool their resources in some fashion to help pay for bills and living expenses, etc. Then another function of families is caring for the sick and the elderly. And like I said, this is becoming an increasingly important function of families today as life expectancies continue to grow. We see a growing number of people that require dependent care and as they get older in life, and family is definitely a function in that it provides caregivers for these dependent elderly individuals. So a conflict theorist, as always, is going to be questioning how power is distributed across families, across marriages, and how these unequal distributions of power can contribute to systems of inequality. So conflict theorists view marriage as a struggle for control of the relationship. And this definitely stems from the reality that marriage and families in general were built in the United States in a patriarchal society, meaning that men were in power. Marriage actually used to be a lot less romantic than it currently is today. Marriage used to be really considered a business transaction between men, a contract of sorts. You might be surprised to find out that women were actually legally considered property of their husbands the first couple hundred years of that the United States was settled. So literally when a woman got married, before she got married, she was considered the property of her father. But once she got married, she became the property of her husband. So getting married was literally this legal kind of business contract of selling a woman's body from one man to another man. Right? So kind of messed up if you think about that. That's the basis of marriage in our society today. And that patriarchal underpinning is largely responsible for the reason that women continue to experience oppression and why we continue to have gender inequality in our society today. The reason it took women hundreds of years to earn the right to vote, the reason it took women hundreds of years to earn the right to get a college education, to enter the paid workforce. And as we've talked about in previous weeks, women are still fighting a lot of these inequalities, trying to get paid the same amounts of men, trying to get paid leave if they have children, etc., trying to be viewed as equally competent and capable workers in the workforce. And a lot of those struggles, again, stem from this patriarchal societal norm that our society was built on that treated women like objects, like property that could be bought or sold through these marriage contracts. So that's kind of a historical approach to the conflict theorist approach on marriage. Conflict theorists view marriage as this problematic institution because it was built on the premise of gender inequality. So conflict theorists are very leery of marriage, and they argue that we really need to transform how power is distributed in marriages and in families in order to get rid of these kind of inherent gender inequalities that are present within the institution of marriage. So other questions that conflict theorists are likely going to consider are who gets stuck with the housework. Again, as we talked about a few weeks ago, even though women are entering the paid workforce at comparable rates to men today, women still get burdened with completing a significant portion of unpaid work at home. Similarly, women still get tasked with completing a number of child-rearing tasks, and men are afforded a lot more leisure time in comparison to women in these marriages and families today. So conflict theorists very much focused on inequalities within marriage and family, and a lot of those inequalities stemming from gender, definitely, but also race and socioeconomic status. We know that people who are of lower socioeconomic status, who tend to be more likely to be people of color, postpone marriage a lot more than white upper class individuals do. And the justification behind that is that a lot of people think that in order to get married today, you need to be financially stable. You need to have a set career in order to be able to care for your spouse and any children that may become your future dependents. So a lot of people, particularly from lower socioeconomic statuses, are postponing marriage. But as a result, when they're postponing marriage, they're also postponing access to the over 1,100 legal benefits and privileges that marriage affords its constituency. So if you remember earlier in one of the mini lectures, we talked about a number of the benefits that married people experience, things like having better psychological health, better physical health, better economic situations, higher levels of happiness. So what we're seeing is that by postponing getting married, people of lower socioeconomic status, who predominantly tend to be people of color, are actually not having the same access to these privileges and benefits that marriage affords people. So it's further complicating these systems of inequality. And these are all questions that conflict theorists are very interested in exploring in terms of marriage and family. And lastly, symbolic interactionism is going to concentrate on the statuses and roles that men and women occupy within the family. For example, this label of the male being the breadwinner and the woman being the homemaker has been kind of socially reconstructed in the past years. We're kind of breaking away from that dichotomy as women are being more widely accepted in the workforce, yet there's still this kind of societal expectation or symbol of women being associated with being the nurturer of the family and the men being kind of the provider for the family. So symbolic interactionists are really interested in better understanding how societies reconstruct the roles and the definitions of different family members and the tasks that are expected of them. A family is successful when members fulfill the roles that are expected of them, is another claim that symbolic interactionists are interested in exploring, especially as families are continuing to become more diverse today. We're seeing a rise in same-gender couples, like we talked about before, a rise in polyamory, a rise in couples choosing not to get married and to rather just cohabitate. Divorce remains a steady factor in families today. So we're seeing a lot of these diverse trends in families, and symbolic interactionists are going to be really interested in studying how the meanings and definitions of family and also the laws that we socially construct in society are going to adapt to better meet the needs of the increasingly diverse families that we're seeing today.